Crowdfunding is an option. It's an option to raise money for your company, but for the longest time, it has come with this reputation. If going to VCs or angel investors fails, then crowdfunding is a plan B. And then this has been mostly true since IndieGogo first popularized crowdfunding in 2008. But the landscape is kind of changing. This is no longer just the last resort sort of thing. With some new legislation, new companies and investors are taking a new interest in crowdfunding, and the numbers kind of confirm that now it's more popular than ever. So for this episode of Startups 101, I want to do a quick overview of your crowdfunding options, how they work, and which might be best for you and for your startup. So crowdfunding really took off in the startup world with reward-based crowdfunding. Now, these campaigns rely on receiving money in exchange for a reward. Usually it's a product, sometimes a service, and again, Kickstarter and IndieGogo are some of the biggest references in this space. And you probably own or at least have heard of a crowdfunded product. You have some winners and some losers that, of course, ended up in our forensics episodes. Now, one of my favorite examples of using crowdfunding to your advantage is a company called Peak Design. We absolutely love, we can't get enough of their gear, and it'd be great if you guys could send us some free things. Anyway, Peak Designs funds the production for all their product launches with a Kickstarter campaign, which is just incredibly clever. It's like a pre-sale that funds their manufacturing process so they don't have to come up with the cash themselves. So reward-based crowdfunding is ideal for creating a community of early adopters, is ideal for companies that have physical, consumer-oriented products in niche markets, because you're essentially getting people to prepay for your product and to fund your manufacturing, so you don't have to come up with that cash. Now, I funded my first startup with a Kickstarter campaign, and it did set me on this journey that I am today that came to Slidebean. And I told a little bit of that story of my first company and how it failed in last week's video on New York. I'm gonna check that out. Anyway, reward-based crowdfunding comes with its issues, and the first one is copycats. Now, there's this army of Chinese companies carefully following campaigns that get traction to essentially rip off the products and beat them to market, which is very much a douche move. Now, on the software side, you also have the problem of perceived value of these digital things. You know, credit in the app or free downloads or a free subscription of a future product, they're not really as exciting as a limited edition signed by the founders type of package that you can do with products. Of course, software can usually raise less money. Now, an exception here, of course, is NFTs and just the madness that we're seeing with how the crowd is essentially funding these NFT and crypto-based projects. But that is a topic for next week's video on NFTs. Still, the Kickstarter campaign that I ran in 2011, it was 10 years ago. It raised most of its money from advertising inside the app for some t-shirts. App pre-sales were maybe $5 each, and getting thousands of people to back you to make up for a decent crowdfunding campaign is not easy on $5 tickets. But in my experience, which again was a decade ago, the key to crowdfunding was promotion. Just being on Kickstarter does not get you backed. You have to hustle with press and with blogs, and I've even seen Facebook ads on Kickstarter campaigns, which I'm assuming must work because they still happen. Now, the key here is economics. So many failed Kickstarter projects happen because of that, because they forget about the cost of fulfilling the rewards or the cost of marketing their campaign. So yes, you are relying on community. Yes, there might be an advocate, organic aspect to a crowdfunding campaign, but the truth is you have to convert traffic, just like converting traffic to your website or your landing page. But more important than that, my take from these reward-based campaigns is that they are good old MVP validation. Your MVP in this case is a video pitch, and you're testing whether or not the market cares about it. It's lean startup all the way. Now, back then we managed to fund Potatoes because it was very little money, but it was still cool and sexy, but mostly because it was a mass audience product. If you're building a B2B or maybe an enterprise software, then there aren't any cool rewards that you can give. You can't get hundreds or thousands of people to care about it enough to back you. So your option might be equity crowdfunding. So this was not a possibility in the early 2000s. We could very well argue that the Kickstarters of the world helped pave the way for equity crowdfunding to become a reality. But the biggest detonator, though, was the 2008 housing crisis and how much small businesses struggled after that to raise capital for their ventures. So in 2012, the Jobs Act loosened a bunch of regulations for startups, and one of them was allowing companies to be public about their round. So before the Jobs Act, it was actually illegal for a company in the US to solicit, that is, to advertise that they were raising money online. So the Jobs Act allowed not only to be public about the fundraising, but to raise from investors that are outside the US, which was also a mess before then. Now, from 2016 onwards, this actually had a pretty good fast track to growth. From 16 to 21, crowdfunding increased by $514 million. And last year, the SEC implemented even more relaxed rules. The annual limit for crowdfunding went from 1 million to 5 million, and they increased the limits for non-accredited investors, which means an investor that doesn't have a minimum net worth. And it also allowed investors to invest through syndicates. But I'm going to get to this in a sec. Before that, I want to talk to you about the original point of crowdfunding being this last resort sort of thing. So people have often doubted how far a crowdfunded company can truly get. The CEO of Pebble, for example, this company that raised millions of dollars on crowdfunding, said that crowdfunding was a last resort for them. And that was a common perception at the time, that the companies going to crowdfunding were just desperate for capital, which is honestly not necessarily wrong. For years, I would agree that this reality extended to equity crowdfunding as well. You'd find companies that tried to close their rounds with angel investors and with VCs, the traditional way, but failed to do so. And you can find plenty of sites with small rounds, with not so great companies, and with failed crowdfunding efforts. And actually, size has always been an issue. Equity crowdfunding rounds are small even today, with a $5 million cap in 12 months. And before that, like I said, there was a $1 million cap, which made it even more difficult for startups to raise a decent amount of money in a short period of time from the crowd. So this meant that companies had to resort to further crowdfunding rounds or just to finding alternative ways of funding to complement their crowdfunding campaign. So in a sense, crowdfunding can limit itself. Growth comes in small bits, and it, of course, can frustrate founders. Plus, an additional challenge comes in the form of looking for venture capital in the future. Another big issue was that these crowd rounds created this massive, crazy cap tables with tons of investors in them. Imagine having to send an investor report or to answer questions from 50 investors, or imagine having to get 50 signatures to approve an acquisition. So new regulation was passed in 2021 that allowed investors to be merged into what they call a special purpose vehicle, which is essentially a separate company that is formed proportionally to the investor check sizes. And then this company invests in the startup. So you get one investor in your cap table, one company investor, rather than 30 individuals. And that company has its own rules to govern itself and a vote on the startup's decision, of course, if that's agreed upon, but they vote as a single entity. So I have never raised an equity crowdfunding round for any of my companies. Our experience here comes from working with the startups that are pursuing crowdfunding, mostly via WeFunder, who we're pretty close with. Shameless plug, that is what we do for a living, not posting YouTube videos. We help startups pitch investors by helping them write their pitch decks, run their financials, script the web for investors, and of course, connect them to platforms like WeFunder.
Hi, I'm Andres Cooper-Rosser. I'm the head of community rounds here at WeFunder. WeFunder is the largest equity crowdfunding platform. They built the industry, and now they're leading the Reg CF industry.
So with ironed technicalities aside, the new regulations have opened this new opportunity, this new secret sauce to crowdfunding, and you can turn your users into investors.
What we're seeing with a few companies we're working with is there's not much space for other investors who aren't customers. When these companies are letting and enabling their customers to jump on board this rocket ship, their customers do. Some invest $50,000 and others invest $100, depending on where they stand. But that's a super strong and powerful metric we're seeing.
So laying out some of my favorite examples. Brewdog is this brewery and pub chain that did a £72 million crowdfunding campaign. This is back in 2011. Now they're based out of the UK, so ignore all these jobs rules because they don't necessarily apply in the UK. Anyway, what they did is they sold 8% of the company on £23 a share, and every shareholder got discounts in their bars and online purchases of their beers. So this is a decade ago, so it's insane what they were able to achieve, and the US just seems to be catching up. Another incredibly successful story is Zenefits. This is a payroll company that raised their first round of funding on WeFunder, $50,000 in 2013. Then they went out to raise $500 million, a Series C round in 2015. Last example here is this company called GameStar, who closed their round just today and are on track to close over $5 million in funding. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt today's video, but I want to thank our sponsor for today, which is Marketer Hire. Freelancers are vital for companies like us, but there's so much talent out there, and it can be tough to find the best marketing candidate for you. And that's where these guys come in. Through Marketer Hire, you can contact expert freelance marketers on a full-time, part-time, or hourly basis, and you only end up paying for the skills and for the time that you actually need, so you don't waste marketing dollars. You can connect with the best marketers out there today through Marketer Hire. You can go to marketerhire.com/Slidebean to try it out. For good or worse, we're also seeing crowdfunding in crypto, where tokens are raising millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. That to me is the ultimate test that there is something here. It is happening and it is growing. Now, one key difference with crypto is the short-term nature of those investments. I would bet you a fiat dollar that most of these investors on crypto are looking to flip those tokens within weeks or months. Startup investing takes longer. You might not see an ROI for 7 or for 10 years. It's a different kind of investor that can make that long-term commitment. And we are yet to see what's going to happen with all of this. So I'm genuinely curious what your perception about this is. The guys from WeFunder think that it's changing. They think that it's no longer such a last resort thing, but I would love to see what you guys think in the comments. Remember, I have office hours available. You can book me anytime using the link in the description, but the first 5 comments on any of our videos get a free session with me. I do one of those every week. So make sure you're subscribed and belled. Of course, again, if you need help with your fundraising, just go to slidebean.com and you can help out. See you next week.